Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Sunday, which means it's time for a new How to Synth tutorial. And today I'm going to show you a song in the track that I'm working on. Just like last time. I really just want to have an excuse to play this track again, because it's just so cool. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about this sound, specifically. And a little bit about the chords, but mostly this sound. And it has to do with the content of the title. I'm not going to talk about it until we hear the sound. So, I'm going to play it. It's very loud. And playing in 3, 2, 1. Neat. And so we can hear that sound by itself. This one? Nope. That one. So what's happening here is that there's actually two ARPs being layered together, and then I'm selectively allowing them to pass through underneath some things. And this whole video, it's about this sound, and we'll talk about how to make it, but it's also about the concept of what the sound is doing and how this sound, when you hear it by itself, sounds very noticeably like a synth, but when it's played in a song, it sounds an awful lot like strings, doesn't it? And it has to do with the idea of physical modeling. And physical modeling is just pretty much what it sounds like, where you're trying to recreate a realistic instrument sound. Well, I mean, that's not necessarily true. There's specific definitions for physical modeling that's more to do with, like, using weird specific math to recreate something based on physics, as opposed to what I'm doing, which is basically just trying to shoehorn in the harmonics in a way that makes it sound similar to the original. And the thing that you want to pay attention to when you are trying to recreate an original acoustic sound is sort of, there's two primary ideas. There's the main harmonic content, which for things like strings and brass and whatever, it's actually pretty similar to just the regular saw wave series, with some phase differences in movement and whatever. And you can see, if you record it or look at it in a Wave Candy or Edison Spectral View or one of those bar graphs that like FabFilter has and Flux Span, just analyze the damn thing. You'll see where the harmonics are and you see how they move, and you can more or less make educated decisions about how to create that yourself. But the other part of it is the fact that in real life, not only is there the instrument, there's also the space. The space that they're in also influences how it sounds to you, the person who's listening to it. And there's also stuff about, like, microphones and cabinets and recording and mixing and impulse responses and that kind of shit. But mostly we're talking about the room it's in. And for things like strings, this generally tends to be large spaces, like a hall or a chamber designed for this kind of thing, a church, a theater, any of those things. And that usually means lots of bigness and reverb sounding stuff, reverb business. So that's pretty much the short of it, is that if you just take kind of sawy sounding things and put them in a big reverb and kind of hide them behind stuff, we'll get essentially the imprint of that it sounds like strings. And it's a lot simpler than it sounds like, mostly because I don't usually plan doing this. Like, it just kind of happens that way. But let's sort of dive into how this is doing its thing. So first what I'm going to disable the fruity balance so we can hear the whole thing unimpeded. I'll disable this one too so we can hear the whole thing without the sidechaining. I actually did a sound a long time ago in my very quickly abandoned How to Lead series that I called Accidental Monastery, that had a lot of similar qualities to it, only that particular one it accidentally sounded like a choir, but for similar reasons, where the harmonic kind of just matched what a choir did, which wasn't intentional, and then to put a reverb on it and put it behind stuff, and it just sounds like a choir. That was a while ago, though. So there's two of these. There's one of them. The one that's the kind of primary lead on top one, and there's this one. they're both going into the same effect channel where they're being reverbed. I'm not really sure what the point of having doing it. I think I was supposed to do some dry in there, but whatever. Anyway, I'm using Valhalla Shimmer, and Shimmer is doing a really good job of imparting the particular feel of the space. Although you might notice that like it doesn't sound anything like any kind of like actual room or chamber or anything like that. And if we listen to it full on like this, we would never get that feeling. But because we show it up only ever so often, we don't have enough time to fully integrate it, and our mind kind of makes up the rest as it hears it. And that's a good bit of psychoacoustic concept right there, where we allow things to kind of be in the background to feel a certain way than they do in reality. And this happens when you convolute things, when you sort of ruin the signal, and like the signal is not what it's supposed to be. You kind of like invent what it actually is. And you might do this a lot, where like you hear someone playing a song like through Skype, like through their microphone, through the thing, or like you hear someone else's headphones and you hear a song, and like you have an image in your head about how that song sounds, and it's usually pretty good. And then when you listen to it like for real, it's way different than what it actually is, and it's usually not better. And that's because our brains fill in the blanks, and we can take advantage of that with these sort of intentionally hidden and obscured elements. The big thing about using Shimmer is a very specific plugin. What it does is that it has reverb, but then it also integrates pitch change in the reverb, kind of like what various delay units that they do as well. And I have it going down. You can't hear it doing it. The feedback is pretty low, so it's not intense, but the diffusion and the size are rather large. And I also have the mod depth way to fuck up. And the mod is just a modulator, it's a pitch modulator. So like you kind of hear that warbling uncertainness. Like it's not really sounding like the original pitch perfectly. That's what's doing that. And that is actually a pretty big part of this whole thing, because the convolution of it makes it sound a lot busier than it actually is. And because of the pitch change, it makes it sound like there's a lot more happening and lower amounts of movement and that kind of deal. And that is when we only hear parts of it being opened up with the reverb or the volume control. We only hear the parts of it. We hear all of that happening, and we don't have the context. We don't have the previous or the post sounds that we would definitely hear, like the tail of it all together. Like when we can hear it all together, we know we can track where the effects are coming from and where they're going, and so we can perceive what is what and what's happening and that kind of thing. But when we're obscuring it all with sidechaining and with other elements behind everything, it comes in the middle like that, and it feels like our brains are basically forced to conclude for us that what's happening is at that 1 second is happening because of what's happening at that 1 second, because we don't hear anything happening beforehand. This is just basic logic stuff that doesn't necessarily reflect reality, but it's what our brain thinks is happening. And again, something else we can take advantage of. As such, let's talk about actually making the sounds. So they're both in patchers, but they're basically both just single harmers. You might wonder why sometimes I open up a whole patcher just for one harmer, and that's because I often plan to do more than just what I'm doing in one harmer. In fact, I probably could have just had both of these in a single patcher with the effects and whatever that I have set up the way that I do in a patcher, and that would have necessitated the use of a patcher and also saved a lot of space. But I don't plan that far ahead most of the time. So these guys. Which one is this? Well, I gotta undo all the volume and whatever. This is the one bummer of using the pretty balance for this purpose. So this is the one that goes up, I think. Yeah. So this filter frequency here is on the low pass, and the low pass is coming down. So it's basically like what if you ever look at like a brassy preset for something, any synth ever that has any kind of brass preset, you'll see an envelope like this, where the filter opens up real fast and then decays. It's kind of like a smoothed out pluck. There's a little bit of unison. I don't think I'm doing anything intense. The phaser. I also have the phaser on the frequency mode, which is kind of like a weird spectral vibrato. If I were to like, do it intense, if I want to just copy the value before I do this. you can see more about what it's doing there. This adds to what the pitch mod is doing on the reverb to do all that stuff we talked about before. And if you don't, or I'm not really sure what the frequency mode of Harmer's phaser does. The normal phaser is basically just a running filter that just notches up and it moves and rolls up and down. You can see the volume being impacted and that kind of thing. And then when you switch to the frequency mode, it puts that exact movement data and applies it to pitch instead of volume change per harmonic. And so you get this movement. And when you do it, you know, large values, it becomes completely unharmonic sound, usually very weird, which can be cool. But right now we're doing this very slightly because I want to give it that kind of uncertainty. The Unison is basically just set the way you see it there. Is that way I like going on. I have a pluck going on, like the actual Harmer's pluck, which I'm not changing in the pluck thing, so it's basically just normal. And that's just there to give it a bit of a volume envelope, although I could have just done a volume envelope, honestly. It wasn't really integral to the process here. The Arp settings are in the patcher, and I have it up. This is set to range or whatever, normal stuff, except that this is not the, this is, I believe, this is double the default time. Normal Arp time, by default, is this. But I wanted to do half that time. So that's why I said that. That's how you do that. Just in case you couldn't figure that out yourself. Now the next guy is a similar enough patch. It's just a little bit different. The pluck is a bit longer, so the decay it doesn't happen as fast. The filter's a bit down more. The frequency amount in the phaser is the same. The mask is the same. Like I'm sure I showed you this in the other guy, but I have this phaser mask, and what this does is changes the impact of the phaser on that note's harmonics, on those harmonics. And this is by hertz value, which is to say that you can see when I hit a note here. Why don't I have vibrato on? I have actual vibrato too. I didn't catch that in the first one. I forgot. Sorry. It's cool that I can see the vibrato in the note movement, but that's showing you, where the note is, and right where the note is where the fundamental harmonic is. So you can see, like, this is some octaves higher. They're going to be in their range. So this is so that, like, the actual note isn't just being distorted in terms of value by the phaser too much, and I'm relying mostly on just the vibrato for that particular purpose. The Unison's a bit higher, and like I mostly just wanted this to be just a little bit different, but then I also reversed the Arp direction. So it goes down, which means that when I play a chord, you can see I'm playing these three notes here, and it actually starts on the high. So like where it would have ended up on the upstroke, it starts up there. So that's why it basically crosses over. Just a word on ARPs is that it's important to have to keep track of how many notes are in your chords, because how long the ARP takes to terminate its full movement was determined by how many notes are in the chord. Because whenever I play one note, oops, well, whatever, the ARP just goes back and forth to one note. So I have to put two notes, doubles the length of the total ARP in 4 notes, then 6 notes. So rhythm-wise, unless you like manually restart your chord when you want to, which you could, if you hold them all out the way they're doing here, it'll do the whole thing. And how long it will take will be determined by how many notes you have in your chord. And then the actual reverb settings, I have this high passing and boost on the top. That's just mixing stuff, and then that's being reverbed. And then this is me sort of artistically controlling when it comes in, which is entirely just set by feel and how I felt it should sound and feel for particular moments. It's not any kind of like mixing decision based on that. And then it goes into the side chaining, where it is again high pass with everything else, and then it's side chained with the fruity balance, and then it becomes a song. So the other thing that kind of imparts this weird sort of semi-orchestral feel is this chord stack, which is also being there's also the bass that's in there. Yeah. But this guy has basically the same concept in terms of it feeling that way. So I have a big old reverb on it. And you just might be wondering why it shuts off real fast. And that's because I have a pretty big reverb on it, and I don't want it to tail off for so long. So I put a peak controller on there. So that's only on when it's on. And that's what that does. And this, again, this actually helps what I was talking about earlier about the idea that we don't get the before or after context. We just have that one moment of what's happening. And that helps to sort of impart this concept of the room being and like the sound, the feel, and the stuff being a result of the sound itself when it happens, and there's no other like extra explanation for it. This sound is just a straight up super soft thing, bigness, and although I am kind of coming down on it. You see this movement down here is this fader coming down essentially, and so this means it starts out all convoluted and huge on the beginning, and then it gets smoothed out near the end. That kind of sounds like a trumpet, doesn't it? I also have this edit on a harmonic unison pitch, which is saying that the higher harmonics steadily have more pitch difference in them than the lower ones. This is what Harmer's harmonic unison pitch window does. It's particularly cool. I have a little tiny pluck on the filter. This center line in the filter represents where the current value is on the knob. So when I go higher than the center and come below the center, this means I'm actually going higher than the value and then going down below the value, in case that was ever unclear to you. That's just there to give it a bit of a tack on the top. That's also helping. I mean, that's happening because of the unison movement. You see this weird pitch curve down here. We only see one voice when we're doing the unison thing. There's actually 9 different voices, but we're only seeing harmonic content of one voice. But we can still see this one voice coming down and doing that. By the way, also in terms of physical modeling, when you want to make something sound like brass, that filtering business works, and that's cool. Although that has a bit of a different impact on quote-unquote real synths. The Harmer's way of doing things with the harmonics essentially being their own little universe and not really interacting with each other and receiving special and individual instruction that together in concert makes it feel like you're making one whole motion like a filter. It essentially means that the harmonics are linear phase in their filtering, which means that you don't get the usual FM when you're screwing with the phase of the frequencies and you're doing a sweep like that. When you see another synth that does like the brassy preset where they go wow, and with the filter, that also has the impact of altering the pitch a bit, which is why when we're doing the unison pitch thickness movement like this, we get a little bit of that brassy feel. And I would recommend experimenting with that if you wanted to actually recreate brass in tandem with the filtering using something like Harmer. But for other stuff, you don't really have to care, because that's just a product of what minimum phase EQs, otherwise known as regular EQs and regular filters, just do as a byproduct of how they operate. Fun little fact there. And that's if you didn't know how FM works. It's not actually pitch modulation, it's phase modulation, because when you move the phase of something while it's being played, it alters the size of the waveform, hence the pitch. It's a good time. Yeah, I think I covered what I wanted to cover about this. I'm not going to give you this patch or these patches because they're really very simple. And this video's purpose was mostly about the general concept of how to use something like this to achieve this kind of result, with the idea of hiding stuff behind things, selectively allowing them through controlling context and reverb. Experiment with reverb, even regular reverb. I mean, if you hide it well enough, and I mean that like you don't draw too much attention to it, like directly, because a lot of people are focusing mostly on the bass and the drums on this, obviously. But like if it's in the background, kind of doing its thing, then people are allowed to draw their own conclusions, and let them do that. Like a lot of students who are doing, that do these kinds of tracks, sort of like a plextro, electro, like a dense dubstep and that kind of thing. They try to have every single sound be heard and plausible and huge and loud up front. And you can do that if that's what you want to do. But if you want to achieve something like this, you have to allow room for some subtlety. And that can be difficult to control, but when you start just doing it a lot, it starts to sort of become second nature. And a lot of the things that you thought were really hard end up being very straightforward. So yeah. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as usual, have a nice day.